Kia ora koutou. Good evening and welcome to this evening's event on showcasing Aotearoa New Zealand to the Middle East and beyond, Expo 2020 Dubai, hosted by the New Zealand Institute of International Affairs Wellington branch. My name is Angus Middleton from the NZIAA Wellington Branch Committee. Founded in 1934 by former Prime Minister Walter Nash, the NZIAA is a non-government organisation which provides an independent and non-partisan platform on international affairs and their impact on Aotearoa New Zealand. We welcome our Institute members, students and guests from NZIAA chapters around New Zealand and overseas on Zoom. Tonight we're honoured to hear from Clayton Kimpton, New Zealand's Commissioner General to Expo 2020, who is joining us live from Dubai in the UAE to discuss the experience that is Dubai Expo, provide a look at the New Zealand Pavilion themed A Nation That Innovates to Care for People and Place, and discuss the trade and foreign affairs benefits to New Zealand. For 170 years, World Expos have provided a platform to showcase the greatest innovations that have shaped the world we live in today. The 34th World Expo in Dubai with the theme Connecting Minds, Creating the Future was delayed 1 year due to the COVID-19 pandemic and will close after 6 months on 31 March 2022. With an equal record of 192 participating countries spread on a site over 1,080 acres, Expo 2020 Dubai is undoubtedly the greatest showcase of human brilliance and achievement since Milan in 2015. I'd now like to provide a brief introduction to our speaker, Clayton Kimpton. Clayton has lived and worked in the Middle East and has a sound understanding of doing business in the region. From 2013 to 2016, Clayton served as New Zealand's Consulate General to Dubai and Regional Director for India, Middle East and Africa with NZTE, before returning to New Zealand with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade as Special Envoy Middle East, including responsibility to assess and advise government on whether to participate in Expo 2020. A lawyer by background, for the 24 years prior to serving as Consul General, Clayton practiced in commercial law firms, including 12 years as a partner at Kensington Swan, where he was chair of the firm for 8 years. Clayton's career is built on approaching complex problems and roles with pragmatism and resilience, focusing on solutions, building cohesive teams, and inspiring confidence in clients, team members, and stakeholders. Clayton is married with 3 adult children. Following the presentation, there will be the opportunity for questions and answers with the Commissioner General. Please feel free to post any questions during the presentation using the chat function, and please keep your video and audio turned off for the entire presentation. We will start with a video and then I will hand over to Clayton. Clayton, now pass over to you.
Angus, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
And can you see the screen?
We can.
Fantastic.
Might just need to put it on the data show slide.
Great. Okay, so oh, is it? Is it not on the?
No, it's
so
not
it's on the data show.
You just need to expand it on the main screen.
Okay. Oh, I see. I have never seen this happen before. Is that working?
That should work. You can't maximize it. I'm trying to.
I haven't seen that happen before. Okay. Is that working?
That's perfect.
Ah, great. Kia ora tātou katoa. It's a real pleasure to be here. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to speak with the Institute. Expo has been going on since the 1st of October last year, as Angus said, delayed by 1 year. And we've got 4 more weeks to go before Expo finishes. But just before we get into the presentation, just to put some background to our participation at Expos. New Zealand does not attend every Expo. Cabinet considers recommendations from officials as to whether or not an Expo is something strategically we should participate in. The last Expo that we participated in was in Shanghai in 2010. We didn't attend the Expo in Milano or in Astana in the interim period. And that's because there wasn't a strong strategic reason to do so. The reason for us participating in Expo 2020 Dubai was driven in equal parts by our trade relationship with the UAE being our 10th largest trading partner and the GCC states being our 6th or 7th largest trading partner, with the fact that the Expo in Dubai would attract more global visitors than local visitors, which is compared with Shanghai, where 95% were local visitors. This Expo was to have 70% international visitors. Also, the diplomatic and strategic relationships with the UAE are very sound, and it's an important relationship in terms of the Middle East. It's also an important relationship in terms of logistics with Emirates, both in terms of passenger and freight. It is a proven re-export hub where a lot of New Zealand product goes through, and also is our access to North Africa, which for a number of New Zealand companies is also an important market. So the decision was made in 2017, or the end of 2016, that New Zealand would participate in this Expo. They are significant investments. The original appropriation was $53 million. That was extended by another $7 or $8 million following the pandemic, with the additional costs that came about as a result of the pandemic and the postponement. So these are very significant investments on behalf of New Zealand, but they're also an opportunity for New Zealand to stand on the world stage and talk about who we are and what is the next iteration of our story to tell the world. One of the other sort of background pieces of information for Expo is the last Expo in Shanghai was very successful. There was a very successful closeout report from that, which pointed to a number of things that would continue to advance our story and our positioning in the world. One of the things that came out of Shanghai was the establishment of the New Zealand Story Group, which is the multi-agency country branding agency that came out of Shanghai. And the purpose of that was to ensure that our story as a country was consistent and was available to not only government, but also to New Zealand exporters to be able to use those assets. And that's something that I'm sure you've seen in the past, and that is certainly something that continues to iterate and has been very influential in helping us put together the exhibition here in Dubai. Lastly, one of the really important things that ministers provided us with guidance on right from 2016, and it's something that has continued through. We've now had 3 governments over the course of our participation at Expo, was to ensure that our Māori culture and values were an integral part of our participation at Expo, rather than being left as an entertainment part of our participation at Expo. So a big focus of what we've done is to ensure that Māori values are at the core of our story and everything that we do at Expo, and that we do present a very holistic Aotearoa New Zealand story that has that strong Māori story at its centre. So that's a bit of a background to why we're at Expo and the reasons for the way we're, I guess, have approached it. Angus mentioned that some of the stats over the size of Expo. One of the challenges for us in New Zealand, but actually a challenge that is across the world, is to explain that an Expo is not a trade show. This Expo would be one of the largest expos that there has ever been, both in terms of the number of countries that are participating, but also in terms of its size. So it is about the size of downtown Auckland. And this is a city that was built in 4 years from absolutely nothing, and also involved a number of 16-lane motorways and a metro extension that was built to bring people into this new city. Expos have pavilions from all of these different countries, but they're an opportunity for the world to celebrate not just business, but art and culture, to hold discussions on policy issues. It's a whole range of things that you're doing at Expo, but at its heart is a celebration of humanity, a celebration of each country. And it's very hard until you actually visit this site to get a full sense of the scale of it. And certainly it's been great to have delegations come up from New Zealand, including a significant delegation with Minister Mahuta in November last year, just to sort of get a glimpse of the size and scale of this. The theme of Expo, Connecting Minds, Creating the Future, is very broad. Given the pandemic, it's a very opposite theme, particularly in terms of the physical connection of minds. The UAE has managed the pandemic in a very different way to New Zealand. It has been largely open since October 2020, with some stringent rules around mask wearing, social distancing, and isolation of people and people with COVID and close contacts. But what that has enabled the UAE to do is to keep their economy going in a way that's quite remarkable, and also to ensure that the volume of people that you need to make an Expo worthwhile have actually turned up. And as at today, there have been 16 million visitors to Expo in the past 5 months. Expo is divided up into 3 districts: sustainability, mobility, and opportunity. It is different to other expos in that ordinarily New Zealand would be located with countries in the Pacific, including Japan, Australia, but basically within our region. This expo was different because countries have been located on a thematic base, and we are in the sustainability district, and our neighbours are Czech, Singapore, Netherlands, Spain, and Germany. And so we're in a much more diverse neighbourhood, if you like, than what we would normally be. And that has allowed us to get very close to those countries and to do a lot of collaborations with them. And so that's been a very positive point about Expo. The other unusual thing about this Expo is that one of the selling points of the UAE hosting Expo was a philosophy of one country, one pavilion. Now, in the past, there have been Pacific pavilions and Africa pavilions or Caribbean pavilions where smaller countries would essentially have a stand or a section within a large pavilion. The UAE took the view that each country needed the opportunity to express its story properly. And so they built and funded the fit out for a pavilion for every country that was participating. And they divided us into those who could afford to be a self-built pavilion and those that were assisted countries. And what this has meant is that if we look at our region, there are pavilions for the Marshall Islands, the Solomon Islands, PNG, Fiji, Tonga, Samoa, Micronesia. They all have Palau. They all have their own pavilions, which has been a really fascinating thing to see how they've demonstrated their expression of why they are unique and what their story is for the world as well. So that's one of the very positive things to have come out of this Expo. 5 months in, there's been more than 28,000 events held so far, and those events are not just entertainment events, but they are business for what they call a World Mandalas. So Mandalas is a meeting place in the Arabic world where they have discussions on really significant policy issues, from biodiversity to space to feeding the world, to violence against women and children. There's a whole range of issues largely built around the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, which allow experts from around the world to come in and be able to speak to those issues. So the number of events has been very impressive. I'd love to be able to be coming to you live from Expo, but as it is only 9 in the morning, the crowd's only just starting to build. But this is a photo of the concourse just outside of the New Zealand Pavilion, and as you can see, people are wearing masks, but it's a very, very steady crowd. There's been 16 million visitors to Expo. 13,000 government VIPs, and these include Prince William, the King and Queen of Belgium, the King and Queen of Sweden, the King and Queen of Norway, the President of Israel, the President of Korea, it's the President of France. It's a situation where the whole world has taken the opportunity to attend and visit and put their best foot forward in terms of expressing themselves. And some countries have certainly made a very, very significant, far more significant than even New Zealand has done in order to really promote themselves. And that's been particularly important as the pandemic is progressing. People are seeing this as an opportunity to engage with the world. In addition to those physical visits, 150 million virtual Expo visits, and New Zealand has a virtual site. Most pavilions do, and in addition to that, Expo has its virtual site as well. And whilst the forecast 70% of international visitors hasn't happened, more than a third of visitors have come from overseas, and you'll see there India, Saudi, the United Kingdom, Russia, and France are the primary sources of those visitors. This is the New Zealand Pavilion, the Aotearoa New Zealand Pavilion. We have had almost 1 million visitors. I think as of yesterday, it was about 950,000 visitors to this pavilion. over the past 5 months, which we're very, very pleased about. Visitor numbers is not a KPI that we have for this, but it's one of those things that everyone asks, how many people have actually visited the pavilion? In addition to those 1 million visitors to those 950,000 visitors to the pavilion, we've had more than 50,000 people dine at the New Zealand restaurant, which is a key part of that. So our pavilion is in the Dubai Expo scene, a modest-sized pavilion. You'll see to the left there are the cones of the Spanish pavilion, which is probably twice the size of ours, and to the right is the Netherlands. So it's 2,000 square meter single level pavilion. The visitor experience, although it looks tall, is actually only one level, and we use the height of that. We use the height of that building to create the drama and impact that we want from our story. The theme of our participation is based on katiakitanga, to care for people in place. And the message that we have for our participation is that New Zealand is a nation of innovators who care for people in place. Now that theme has really taken off, particularly in the pandemic. It's a theme that resonates incredibly well with our visitors. It's also a theme with the innovation part, which was important to ensure that we were not focused on tourism, but that we were focused on that innovation story around New Zealand, and really focused on innovations that do care for people in place. The way that we decided to talk about caring for people in place was with reference to the Whanganui River, Te Awa. A lot of New Zealanders don't know that in 2017, this river was recognised as part of the community and given the status of a legal person. And this legislation was innovative. It was the first of its kind in the world. And it was also legislation that listened and enshrined Indigenous values to solve a modern day problem. The people of the Whanganui would say that the river has always been a part of the community. The legislation didn't change their perspective of the river, but it did enshrine it in terms of our legal system and our governance, that this river has its own identity as a legal person. What that effectively means is that the role the trustees of Te Awa play is that for anyone who wants to draw water from the river or discharge into the river or build or use the river in any way, they must ask the trustees. And what that allows for is the management of the river as a whole, rather than a regional council, a city, a district dealing with the river during the part that flows through their borders, if you like. And one of the messages around care for people in place is, as the river is healed or restored, all of the communities that live along that river benefit from that. And so it's a good example of how if we look after nature, nature will look after us. It's a good example of innovation in terms of the legislation. So I will just take you through, I hope. So one of the first rooms that visitors go into, remembering that an experience at an expo is not long. This one is about 10 minutes, 10 to 12 minutes, and needs to be emotive, it needs to be entertaining, but it also needs to educate people. And so we're trying to get all of those things into one. And the creative team behind this came up with the various sections of this experience. And the first room that people go into, they see the river coming towards them in a digital form, and sensors pick up how we as individuals interrupt the flow of that river. And at the very end of the wall are the words "I am," coming from the whakatauki in Whanganui of "I am the river is me." So it's a very immersive visitor experience. There are a lot of Instagram shots of these particular walls that you can see in this slide, and it certainly engages people right from the very start. And can I say at this point that we have done this in partnership with Whanganui Iwi, and that's been a really valuable and rewarding partnership that we've had with them. and we certainly carry the responsibility of looking after the tikanga, or looking after the story, and the references to Aotearoa throughout this period of time very seriously, because it's such an important part of our presentation to the world. The next room that visitors turn into is what we call the river room, and this is a very this is a very dramatic room, using the height of the building. Water falls from 10 meters either side of you. It creates its own atmosphere, and it creates a sort of a breeze in there. And on the walls in Arabic, Tadao, and English are the words, "The river is our essence. When it is healed, we are healed." In the center of the room is the toka from the source of the Wanganui at Mount Tongariro, and that has been digitally mapped. And every time the building pulses, the rock of the stone appears to move, representing the life force of the story, the fact that this river is a legal person. The visitor then moves into what we haven't got very good names as New Zealanders. We've got the film, we've got the entry room, the river room, and the film room. So this is the film room, and this is a 6-minute, very immersive film with, as you see, the screens going all the way around, and also a cube in the middle, which also has projections onto it. The visitor gets the sense that they're inside the film, and the film goes through a whole range of things, talking about sustainable fishing, regenerative farming, the diversity of culture, the fact that we have cities and universities and museums, which is the part of the film that you can see here. Goes to food and beverage, our agricultural technology, healthcare, a whole range of different sectors within New Zealand, to try and get that breadth of what the New Zealand society is like today. And we wanted to, one of the things that we're measuring is that shift in perception of New Zealand. New Zealand is often in this region known as a beautiful place to visit that's a long way away. But we wanted to bring out that notion that we are a nation of innovators who care for people and place. So whilst there was a lot of wonderful scenery in this movie, the focus is not on tourism, the focus is on our innovations. And what a great decision that was, not to have tourism as our focus, because that would have been a challenge over the past 5 months. Now we can see that tourism is going to open eventually, but we're able to tell a story that very much in substance, rather than having to give explanation as to perhaps why our borders were closed during this. So it's been, it really has been a good decision to make. A key part of our participation in this expo, though, has been, yes, we have the exhibition, which we've had thousands and, well 950,000 people have already enjoyed. But next to that, we have Tiaki, the restaurant and hosting areas that sit beside the exhibition. And this is an incredibly important part of our engagement at Expo, because it's here that we're able to show our manaakitanga, have people experience New Zealand food and beverage, because everything in this restaurant is from New Zealand and is already available in the UAE. And but also for New Zealand companies, for New Zealand government, to be able to build relationships with people. Deals are made. There are a range of things that are taking place, whether it's product launches or networking functions, all taking place within this restaurant. It has become one of the 5 most popular restaurants in Expo, and it's something we're very proud of. We've got a partnership with Emirates Flight Catering, who operate our pavilion, and that has really paid off, because they have been able to bring in staff from their first class cabin crew, the first class lounges, and one of the key things that has happened in this restaurant is that the staff are so confident, are so knowledgeable about the menu and about New Zealand, that the diners feel incredibly welcomed and comfortable in that environment. You'll see some stats there. The Kiwi burger is a big seller at 5,300 Kiwi burgers sold to date, and you'll be pleased to know they had both beetroot and egg on them. We are in a competition with Estonia in terms of having the best gourmet burger at Expo. Estonia has thrown truffles on theirs, which I think is why they're up there with us. But it's been one of the highlights of our participation, and we have a lot of the Emirati royal family will be coming just to attend this restaurant because it's become such a well-known place to meet. We don't just have burgers, we've got venison, scampi, salmon, amazing kapiti cheese from Frontiera. And so it's a full range of restaurant, as you can see from those dishes there. We have been supported throughout by 26 sponsors, and whilst government pays for our participation at Expo, we couldn't do particularly our leverage program without those sponsors. Our primary sponsor is Frontiera, followed closely by Convita. The room that you can see there is part of the Tiaki hosting area, but that back room is known as the cooperative room by Frontiera. All of the furniture, the lights, the wood, the chairs, these have been contributed to by our sponsors. So whether it's Seated Design or Formway, or the wonderful lights by David Trubridge, throughout, or the Abodo wood on the walls, throughout the hosting area and the restaurant, people can see New Zealand design and products. You'll see on the very back wall, there's artwork, and we have a partnership with Te Papa. Rather than bringing sort of 2 or 3 pieces of amazing art to sort of be static on the wall, we have a partnership with them whereby we're able to show digitally 120 pieces of New Zealand artwork, and it's arranged so that people can engage with it on their phones to be able to choose which painting they like and to say why. So it's a very engaging and sort of way of dealing of viewing the art that New Zealand has at Te Papa. This has been an opportunity to reconnect with the world, and it's probably, for such a time as this, it's quite remarkable. We would not have envisaged when we first decided to go to participate in this expo, just the degree to which this was an opportunity to reconnect with the world. It has strengthened our relationships with Gulf countries, but also with the range of other countries that are with us. In this picture, we have Minister Mahuta and Ambassador Hawkins sitting here with the Commissioner General and Deputy Commissioner General of the UAE Pavilion on her official visit. And that was just an example of the level of connection that we're able to get with the UAE. But I've received delegations from Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, the UK, a whole range of ministers and officials from those countries, where we're able to have informal bilateral discussions briefed by ambassadors who haven't yet been able to meet with those people because of the lockdowns in their countries. And so it's been unusual in terms of the ability to be able to engage with people at this expo, which where people haven't been able to engage within those countries. We're also looking forward to Minister O'Connor, who will be here next week, and he will be in the country for 4 days as well. And so it's a really good opportunity to be able to engage with ministers and help to build those relationships. And also with Minister O'Connor to be able to work on with a range of companies that are here as well. We have had a number of VIPs visit the New Zealand Pavilion. This is a photo of His Highness Sheikh Abdullah Al Nahyan, who is the Foreign Minister. And of course, he also met with Minister Mahuta when he was there, when she was there. But we would have VIP visits, or VVIP visits as they're called here, daily. We've got a range of 2 today. It is a large royal family in the UAE, but we're also receiving heads of state from other countries, religious leaders, entertainers, and we have become a place where people refer, we're referred to as a pavilion that is very accessible and easy to visit, but telling a singular story. And so that draws people in, so which has been really valuable. And of course, a number of the VIPs, either before or after spending time at the restaurant, which means they get to engage with New Zealand food. The gift that we give to dignitaries is Manuka honey, and that's a very, very popular thing here. And having Convita as a sponsor has certainly helped with that. Just very quickly, some of the other things that we're doing. Obviously, there's business missions and a business focus, which I'll talk about really briefly soon. But there have been some other very, very significant engagements. On the top left hand, you'll see Nahiwi there, Nahiwi Tamwana from the Iwi Chairs Forum. New Zealand hosted the Tiaki Festival of Indigenous and Tribal Ideas in November, and this was sequenced with the visit by Minister Mahuta, who opened this conference. This is the first time an Expo has had an Indigenous festival like this. New Zealand led it, but we quickly were joined by Canada, the US, Panama, Paraguay, Australia, Malaysia, Sweden, Finland, countries with their own strong Indigenous cultures, and they brought all of these people together into one place in order to look at the policy and the policy issues that impact Indigenous peoples, but also the trade and sort of economic issues that would also impact Indigenous peoples. At the conclusion of Te Aratini, the taonga that you see there was handed to the Bureau of International Exhibitions, who has now taken on board the task of ensuring that a Te Aratini Festival of Indigenous Ideas will take place at every Expo going forward. So it's a great legacy coming out of this Expo. On the top right-hand side, you'll see a picture there of Sunrise. Now, Sunrise is a documentary that was filmed in India, and it is a story around violence against women and children. It's a story that has universal application, and we were able to do a collaboration with the pavilions for the United Nations, the Women's Pavilion, and the India Pavilion, to call together the ambassadors and commissioners general of all the participating countries to stand and pledge to end violence against women and children. So it was a very, very it was a very moving documentary, but it was very sort of poignant moment where all of the ambassadors and commissioners general who were there stood and took that pledge together. We then have in the bottom left-hand corner, Casey and Karina, who were the winners of the Master Chef in New Zealand, with one of our young chef interns. And during January, we had Taste New Zealand. We brought chefs up from New Zealand, not just Casey and Karina, in order to be able to engage in a really, really fun way with guests over the types of food that we have in New Zealand and how we have this amazing culinary skills. And on the bottom right, you'll see a picture there of Wonderland. And this was put together by Paris Goebel, curated by Paris Goebel, bringing together young people from New Zealand who auditioned to be a part of this. It was an outstanding show of world-class quality, which went on for 4 nights to packed crowds. So that just gives you an idea of the range of things that we're doing at Expo. It's in order to be able to promote New Zealand, our diversity. It's not just simply a matter of talking about trade, although trade is obviously very important. Very quickly, you'll see in the center there, the lady in gray. She is one of our young interns. One of the amazing things about having the partnership with Emirates Flight Catering is that they have brought up three young chefs to be able to be schooled at the Emirates Flight Catering School, and they are based in the kitchen here at Expo in the New Zealand Pavilion. And so we have 3 young New Zealand chefs that are very much at the heart of what we're doing. Business engagement is also very, very important. And we've had more than 100 events held at our pavilion purely focused on business. It is such an important market in terms of the UAE. I mentioned the GCC in North Africa. So not only our sponsors like Fonterra and Convita, but a range of other New Zealand companies have come up to Dubai and are using the Expo as a platform for leveraging their business their business opportunities. And NZTE has a very engaging business leverage program, which began 18 months ago, preparing companies for coming into the market rather than companies simply turning up to an expo hoping that they might do some deals. So it's a much more it's a much more extensive program around that business leveraging across all of the sectors involved. I mentioned before that there are these World Mandalas, and we've had speakers join from New Zealand in all of those areas, from climate and biodiversity and space through to tolerance and inclusivity. We've had an equal number of in-person speakers as we have virtual speakers, and it's been really, really important for New Zealand's expertise, New Zealand's thought leadership to be a part of these discussions, which generally involve between 8 and 10 experts from a range of different countries. In terms of our entertainment and culture, one of the things that we did around our National Honour Day was we had some street artists from New Zealand come up, and over the course of a week, they prepared this 20-metre mural, which became a very popular spot within the Expo city, and we had a DJ going, and it became a real hub of activity. Again, just talking about the diversity and youth of New Zealand. And you'll see there the sorts of entertainers we have, including Solo Mio and 660. They were there on our National Day, and we have Annie Crummer, who's coming up next week as well. So it's important that we continue to show a range of things, including some very strong kapa haka groups in there as well. Finally, just in terms of our coverage, yes, we've had more than 950,000 people visit the New Zealand Pavilion. There's been 16 million visitors to Expo itself, but our media coverage, particularly internationally, has been very strong. Our media reach at more than 800 million, and the social media impressions of more than 40 million. It's been quite incredible, and as we're measuring that through through the agencies that are working with us on that, we're really up there with our competitor countries, whether that's Australia or France or the Netherlands, in terms of that level of reach. And I guess because our story is quite targeted and simple, that has allowed the story to get out there. But we've got some really strong human stories, and these are the 3 interns, chef interns from New Zealand that I referred to. That's been really engaging for the range of media that are involved at Expo as well. So thank you. I'm really keen to answer questions. I hope I haven't spoken for too long. There's certainly an awful lot to talk about, and I've covered quite a range of issues, so I appreciate that, but really keen to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Clayton, for that insightful presentation and glimpse into New Zealand's presence at Dubai Expo. It's unfortunate that due to COVID, Kiwis haven't had the opportunity to visit. My last Expo visit was in Shanghai in 2010, another very large site. And I always remember the immense pride you get as a Kiwi when walking through such a large expo, or may as well just call it a city, and then see the Aotearoa New Zealand Pavilion the first time. We've now got the opportunity for Q&A. You can submit your questions in chat. And I see we've got a few questions here already, so I may as well start. Here's one from Sandeep in Christchurch. Hi, Clayton. Thanks for your presentation. How do businesses build on from here post-Expo? As Angus mentioned, many weren't able to travel.
It's a great question. So NZT has an office in Dubai, and that's one of the things that's perhaps a bit unique about the UAE. We have a strong embassy in Abu Dhabi. An hour and a half up the road, we have a very strong consulate, which has the trade commissioners in as well. So the NZT business leverage program has been working for 18 months with New Zealand companies They've brought companies up. This is before the pandemic, certainly preparing them for being here in the market. So although the general public has not been able to travel too easily up here from New Zealand, we had one of the things that I was doing when I was down in New Zealand in February and March 21 was securing sufficient quarantine spaces to enable business missions to be able to, and entertainers to be able to travel. And so there were a key group of speakers, businesses, and entertainers that were able to be here in person and had the quarantine spaces. And so a number of businesses were prepared to take that, that risk of quarantine, of having to spend up to 14 days in quarantine, to be able to make the most of what they were able to achieve at Expo. We also have a number who had offices offshore. And so New Zealand companies based in Europe, and also New Zealand entertainers based in Europe were able to come down and participate. So I don't feel that we've, I think given COVID, we've actually had a very strong New Zealand presence. Those companies that have been involved will continue to build on those relationships that they're developing here using the NZT office in Dubai.
Okay, great. Another question here from Trisha Warbridge. To what extent did a perception that New Zealand has managed the pandemic well, particularly in the early days, help with the promotion that it is a country focused on the care of people and place?
I'll have to be a little bit controversial here. The perception was for about 6 months that New Zealand had done tremendously well, and that was 6 months in 2020. The perception by the time that Expo had opened was not positive. And so we didn't sell ourselves as having handled COVID well in this market, because we were in a country that was open and living with COVID far, far earlier than New Zealand was. So the perception here was that New Zealand was closed, and that was probably one of our challenges, is to engage with the world with this understanding that New Zealand was closed, that New Zealanders couldn't visit, that there was no tourism industry. So I think, and that was one of the challenges my team had, just working with our team based in New Zealand, just that perception difference of what people overseas how people overseas were viewing New Zealand as opposed to how New Zealand was viewing itself. And so we didn't sort of put out there that our COVID response was world leading, because the perception wasn't sort of equal with that.
Okay, great. Now I've got one question. The next World Expo is in Osaka, Japan, 2025. Has New Zealand made a decision whether to attend that expo at this point?
No decision's been made yet. So the minister is really waiting on a readout of what this one was like before making a decision on going forward with Japan. I know Japan's a very, very important market for New Zealand, but that decision will be made in the next few months.
And so what the lead time is usually 4 years, really, is it? And then 2 years for construction or something, I'm guessing.
Well, it depends if you're going to build a pavilion or rent a pavilion. There's a whole range of ways of engaging. So I'm not on the Osaka team. I know that a team is putting together a paper for the minister and for cabinet, and they'll be taking all of those things into account. But as we get closer, yes, the timeframes become tight. The closer you get, and it impacts what you're able to do in the pavilion.
And here's a question from Karen Dickey, our chair, Wellington branch. Thanks, Clayton.